The snow fell in thick flakes on the night of October 17, 1998, as Richard Graham and his wife Fernanda drove up the winding road towards Samuel Peterson's secluded mansion. The Gothic structure loomed out of the darkness, white lights casting eerie shadows across the snow-covered lawn. "I have to admit, Sam does have a flair for the dramatic," Fernanda remarked as Richard parked the car. "He's always had a thing for the Victorian era," Richard said, zipping up his coat against the biting cold. "I think he secretly wishes he lived in that time." Crunching through the snow, they climbed the steps to the front door and rang the bell. A few moments later, it swung open to reveal a dashing young man with a charming smile. "You must be Mr. and Mrs. Graham. I'm Harold, Mr. Peterson's new assistant," he said, ushering them inside. "A pleasure to meet you both." "Sam's mentioned you," Richard said, shaking Harold's hand. "Only good things, I hope?" "Of course. Now let me take your coats." The other guests are assembled in the main hall. The interior was lavishly decorated, Renaissance paintings lining the walls illuminated by the glow of antique lamps. Classical music drifted through the air. Sam appeared dressed in an impeccable Victorian suit, complete with top hat, greeting Richard and Fernanda warmly. "Glad you could make it, old sport," he said, clapping Richard on the shoulder. "Dreadful weather. I was afraid it might keep people away." "We wouldn't miss it," Richard assured him. "Though I see the years are catching up to you. Is that a gray hair peeking out from under your hat?" Chuckling, Sam swept off the hat and ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "With age comes distinguished charm, my friend. You'll understand one day." As Sam excused himself to welcome the newest arrivals, Fernanda turned to Richard with a quizzical look. "Does Harold seem like the assistant type to you? His hands look more suited to hard labor than office work." Richard shrugged. "Sam's always had eclectic taste in employees. I'm sure the kid is smarter than he looks. Shall we mingle? I could use a drink." They made their way into the main hall, a grand space with vaulted ceilings and glittering chandeliers. Guests in cocktail attire clustered in small groups, chatting and sipping champagne. Richard and Fernanda circulated, catching up with old acquaintances. An hour passed pleasantly, the string quartet providing an elegant ambience, until Dave Beckett, an old-school friend of Sam's, spoke up over the din of conversation. "Anyone seen Sam lately? It's not like him to leave his own party unattended for so long." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people glanced around, realizing it had been some time since the host made an appearance. "Perhaps he went to check on his mother?" suggested Mrs. Ward, one of Sam's neighbors. "She lives on the 3rd floor and hasn't been well, poor dear." The speculation continued until Lucas Olding, Sam's lawyer and closest confidant, volunteered to go upstairs and investigate. He returned a few minutes later, face pale and hands shaking. "He's not there," Lucas announced, voice trembling. "I checked his mother's rooms, I checked everywhere. Sam is gone." A hush fell over the stunned guests. "Gone? How was that possible?" Confusion and unease prickled down Richard's spine. Fernanda squeezed his arm, her detective instincts kicking into high alert. Dave took charge, telling everyone to stay calm. "I'll check the security cameras," he said. "I do maintenance work for Sam, I have access. Mr. and Mrs. Graham, would you mind coming with me? I could use a second opinion." Fernanda readily agreed, pulling Richard along despite his hesitation. They followed Dave to a small room on the 2nd floor, the walls lined with monitors showing feeds from cameras placed around the property. Dave rolled back the footage until Sam appeared on screen, stepping into the elevator on the 1st floor. They watched him exit onto the 3rd floor and turn down the hall towards his mother's suite. 10 minutes later, he reappeared, striding back to the elevator. The car descended and opened onto the 1st floor completely empty. Sam had vanished. "What the hell?" Dave muttered, rewinding and replaying the clip. But there was no mistake, Sam entered the elevator and never came out. "This isn't possible. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation," Richard offered weakly, but Fernanda shook her head. "A man can't just disappear from an elevator," she said, mind whirring. "Dave, can you pull up the camera angle inside the car?" He did, and Fernanda pointed to a square outline on the ceiling. There, an access hatch. And look, the camera on the third floor, it's been moved so you can't see the person's face as they get in. This was planned. The question is, why? Richard's stomach churned with dread. What had Sam gotten himself into? Was this some elaborate stunt, or something more sinister? He met Fernanda's gaze and saw his own unease reflected back at him. They needed to get to the bottom of this, and quickly. Fernanda took the lead as they hurried upstairs, ignoring the anxious chatter of the guests on the first floor. She moved with purpose, years of police training evident in her keen eyes and confident stride. Richard struggled to keep up, unnerved by the eerie stillness of the third-floor hallway. Sam's private quarters were in shambles, the signs of a frantic search clear in the overturned furniture and scattered papers. Clothes and personal items littered the floor, drawers yanked out and emptied. Only the Bible on the neatly made bed appeared untouched. "Someone was looking for something?" Fernanda murmured, stepping carefully through the chaos. "And it seems they found it. The safe is empty, no cash, no valuables." Richard ran a hand through his hair. "Christ, you think this was a robbery? Some thief forced Sam to let him into the safe and then... What? Kidnapped him? Possibly. But that doesn't explain the elevator." Fernanda examined the window, testing the lock. No forced entry. And look there, that blinking light in the corner. Another camera, but inactive. The one in the hall was adjusted, but this one was deliberately disabled. Our thief was camera shy. They moved back into the hall, Fernanda studying the wall with a frown. She reached up and touched a spot near the ceiling, fingers coming away dusty. There used to be another camera here, recently removed, going by the discoloration. All these little details. This was carefully orchestrated. Richard's head spun as he tried to piece it together. But why go to all that trouble? If it was a straightforward burglary, why the elaborately staged disappearance? And why leave the Bible untouched? That is a wonderful question, Mr. Graham. Let's see if we can find the answer downstairs. The guests bombarded them with questions the moment they emerged from the elevator. A tangle of panic and confusion. Where is Mr. Peterson? What's happened? We've called the police. They're on their way. This is diabolical. Do you think he was taken by some demonic force? Holding up her hands for quiet, Fernanda took control of the room. Please, everyone remain calm. The police will sort this out when they arrive. In the meantime, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the missing guest. Has anyone seen Harold in the past hour? A tipsy replies came back, including one from the young lady Harold had winked at on his way out. He left around 9, I think. Such a shame. He was rather cute. Fernanda nodded grimly. So our mysterious new assistant is unaccounted for. And Dave, I don't suppose those back stairs see much use? Or that the rear door camera has been working recently. The pieces clicked into place for Richard. Harold slipped out once he'd played his part, going out the back to avoid being seen, while Sam snuck out. To where? And why? I suspect I know where Sam is, Fernanda said. But as for why, I'm afraid only he can answer that. Shall we take a walk? The wind had died down by the time Richard, Fernanda, Dave and Lucas trudged through the snow towards the frozen lake. The night sky stretched overhead, stars glittering coldly behind wisps of cloud. A single light burned in the window of the small cottage on the shore. Lucas reached it first, knocking urgently. Sam, are you in there? It's Lucas, open up. Muffled sobs echoed from within, and after a long moment, the door creaked open. Sam sat slumped in an armchair, still in his rumpled formal wear. His face was blotchy and tear-stained, eyes red-rimmed as he stared at them hollowly. Why, Sam? Lucas asked, anguish straining his voice. Why would you do this? Stage your own disappearance, rob your own home? Help us understand. Sam lifted his head, lips trembling. You don't know what it's been like. Decades I've spent as my mother's keeper, a prisoner to her demands. She's a miserable, spiteful woman, and I'm all she has. I thought I'd never escape her grip. So you decided to, what? Fake your own supernatural abduction? Richard asked incredulously.
Arbitrarily escaped Sam.
I knew she'd never let me go willingly. This way, I become a tragic victim, whisked away by dark forces. She can't blame me for abandoning her. And I can finally live my own life. Fernanda's face hardened. And Harold? How does he factor in? Harold is the son of an old friend, eager for money, willing to play a part. I had him scope out jobs at the house, get friendly with the staff. He disabled the cameras, acted as my double for the vanishing act. Once I'd retrieved what I needed from the safe, he walked out the back while I snuck away to the cottage. Lucas shook his head. You think that makes this okay? Lying to your friends, scaring people half to death. I was desperate, Sam pleaded. I arranged for Mother's care. She won't want for anything. But I couldn't live like that anymore. Always at her beck and call, enduring her abuse. Can't you see I had no choice? There's always a choice, Fernanda said coldly. And you chose deception and cowardice. Well, now you've got your wish, a life apart from your mother. I hope it's worth the cost. She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the others to trail after her. Richard caught up and took her gloved hand in his as they crunched back through the snowdrifts. Hell of a night, eh? Fernanda sighed. I've seen my share of desperate men driven to desperate acts. But the way Sam went about this, the cruel theatricality of it, I'll never understand. At least you cracked the case. Quite the impressive detective work, Mrs. Graham. That brought a small smile to her face. Well, Mr. Graham, I couldn't have done it without my stalwart husband by my side. Promise me one thing, though. Anything, my dear. If you ever decide to leave me, just tell me to my face. No need for an elaborate vanishing act. Richard chuckled and drew her close. Never. You're stuck with me. I'm afraid. They walked on through the snowy night, the lights of the mansion glowing behind them, as the strange tale of Samuel Peterson's disappearance passed into local legend.